Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's LRQA and LRQA Netitude webinar. Today, we will be presenting on cybersecurity more than a cost. What our intentions are for today's session is to really talk about how the board sees cybersecurity as an expense. So when the board does see cybersecurity as an expense, it makes it people's jobs within information security extremely difficult within this ever-evolving threat landscape. So today what we're going to be looking at is how can we identify within the industry the opportunity cost for cybersecurity within organizations. And what today's session is really going to focus on is breaking down the pillars of cybersecurity within actually generating revenue for your organization. And that's actually going to be done by our two speakers today. So Nick Prescott, who's a principal consultant at LRQA Netitude within our CISO services, is going to be presenting on the different areas that he advises on his clients with 25 plus years of experience in advising on how to communicate to your board how cybersecurity can actually be more than a cost. Additionally, we also have Katerina Liana, who is a part of LRQA and is a core technical product manager. Katerina comes with us with 25 plus years experience as well, but has a lot of background in helping organizations with compliance, showing that compliance is not just a cost, but also a way to modernize your organization and bring it to a cost-efficient area. My name is Alex Majali. I will be your moderator today. Following our presentation, we are going to be going into some panel questions where I'll be asking our speakers some hard-hitting questions that are going to really dig at how we can provide communication to the board that is really going to help our viewers today bring more to the table when it comes to cybersecurity. So without further ado, we're going to start off with Nick, and Nick's going to show us some of the pillars to start off.
Hi everyone, and thank you very much for joining, and thank you for that warm introduction, Alex. It's I'm sure we'll have a really informative and educational webinar. So what's the cybersecurity landscape that we're looking for? There are four main things that I'll start off with today. We'll talk about the evolving threats, the regulatory changes, the security skill gaps that we have, and the integrated approaches. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. So one of the first things we've got is the evolving threats. They are constantly changing. There's rapidly changing between malware and ransomware. You get it from the kind of bedroom-based script kiddies who are there to make a name for themselves, and then that kind of promulgates into the kind of state-sponsored nation hackers, organized criminals, and they come in all shapes and sizes. So it isn't just about cybercrime isn't just a small town thing. It's a multinational organized crime business as well. Malware and ransomware is becoming increasingly more sophisticated. There's not a day goes by when there isn't a ransomware attack somewhere happening, and it is something that is constantly evolving. One of the big things we've certainly seen over the last 6 to 12 months is AI-powered attacks, and that's one of the areas where we see a new emerging threat coming from. Is AI-created phishing emails, AI-created malware, basically using complex computer models to kind of really break into that small stuff. And that's really why, doing cybersecurity on the defensive side or on the blue team side, it's making sure you keep pedaling, making sure you keep up with the pace, because you keep updating and keep making sure that you have those latest threats in place. One of the things we've certainly seen, especially since as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic on a global basis, is that cyber criminals are adjusting their threat vector from very much the kind of office-based environment to the kind of mobile hybrid working environment. And we've seen a lot of instances where they're starting to target things like home networks, and mobile networks. Classic ones are weak Wi-Fi networks and cafes and stuff like that. So also you see the government are always chasing kind of the regulation in there. Recent regulation you've had within the United Kingdom and Europe, for example, GDPR. You've now got new versions of the Digital Operation Resilience Act. The EU are thinking about an AI Act. Within the United States, there's new presidential orders that are coming through that basically compel US companies to have a much kind of broader security picture in place. Obviously, there are something like 47 different data privacy laws in the United States at the moment, but obviously there's a kind of the Californian kind of privacy code is one that is kind of taking the lead on that one. So the government's always behind on the regulation on things like this, but they are certainly catching up. And they, for example, in New York State, there's the NYFS 500 that requires companies to have a cybersecurity posture. So there are always regulatory changes happening. The cybersecurity industry is facing a significant skills gap. I think, for example, there's something like 1.5 million vacancies that are needed before 2030 in the United States. And also there's a big need across Europe as well to make sure that the people kind of keep the skills up. So much is the demand, there's also a real demand for automated solutions and making sure that the kind of first line of security threats is automated as much as possible. But like with any automation, they need to be set up right, and that's where the real expertise comes into it. And when we go on to the next bit about integrated approaches, it's no longer just security isn't no longer just kind of putting a firewall in place. There's been a massive growth in things like EDR, XDR, MDR, and kind of building a balance whereby every device is a zero trust model. So it's making sure that every time that a user logs in, they identify themselves correctly, making sure that the user is a unique user on the machine, and then kind of building up threat intelligence models and continuous security models. So it's no longer just keeping the bad stuff at the firewall, it's making sure they have a limited access around that. So if you go to the next slide, please, we're going to talk about guiding the discussion. And the thing I'm going to talk about before I pass over to my excellent colleague, Katerina, is talk about procurement, operational resilience, and the breach readiness side as well. So if you can move on to the next slide about procurement. So when we talk about procurement here, we're basically talking about when you go and buy the new stuff in the world. So in many ways, the big suppliers, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Apple, they've got a huge share within the market, but they don't cover everything. So one of the key things is making sure that you conduct that third-party due diligence with your partners, with your suppliers. So making sure that you understand that when you get involved in those agreements that you have and you share the data, it's making sure that those boundaries are kind of set in place. One of the things I've certainly seen when you look at the boundaries on access control is suppliers have administrative access to your environment, which is all very well and good, but often a lot of the time it's that the bad guy gets in through the back door. Something like 2/3 of all data breaches happen because of basically the supplier's got administrative access and you're too busy kind of protecting your own environment. So making sure that you have the right role-based access control in place and making sure that's in place. Also kind of keeping an eye on your third parties is really, really key. One of the things that we've certainly seen a lot of, and that's a business impact as well, is that a lot of companies just send them a once-a-year questionnaire. We need to have some kind of more consistent monitoring that's in place. So kind of new things like tools such as attack surface management. What's that able to do? It's able to consistently monitor your third-party supply chain. So if they do have a breach that goes into the press or through open source scanning, there's a vulnerability that's found, that kind of flags up in your environment. One of the other areas in terms of making sure you have a good relationship with your partners is making sure that when the contract does end, is that they have a good exit strategy. it's the key thing is, we've seen this with a lot of suppliers, is that the service stops, but they kind of keep the data, and then that data is used as part of a cyber breach. So it's really making sure that there's a good thing. So what's the benefit of all this? If we move on to the next slide, so being kind of procurement ready, what do I mean by that? It basically means that don't just kind of get the next supplier because it's, they sounded really great at the trade show. It's more than just doing the right due diligence. Not only make sure it's more robust and resilient in terms of the relationship that you have with the client, but also making sure that it makes your business work better. So when we move on to things such as operational resilience, there are a number of key things there. So if you bring up the first graphic, brilliant, that's fantastic. So it's making sure is how do you make it more than just a cost, and by having kind of proactive and kind of reactive security. So security is kind of a number of things. It's raising the cost of attack, and that's improving your cyber resilience, but also at the same time, it's having that cultural shift, so you build up that cyber maturity, so you have that kind of proactive security, implementing your controls, your policies, procedures, and making sure that they kind of prevent the cyber attack before they occur. And that's putting the right endpoint protection on, that's putting firewalls in there as well, and making sure that you do continuous risk assessments, training, patch management. A lot of the time we see when we do our CISO work is we come in and there's been some legacy stuff that hasn't been patched for sometimes decades. We're not joking. And certainly there's something you wouldn't leave in your home untouched. You wouldn't give it a good clean. So you've got to make sure that all this stuff is patched and updated. Also, is a key part of resilience is when it does happen, have clear lines of communication, roles and responsibility, kind of mitigate the effects of an incident. So making sure that you have that insurance side is that if there is an incident, there's clear paths of communication, there's a clear action plan, and making sure that you can put all of that in place. So it comes to a kind of efficiency versus effectiveness. If you're efficient and effective, your security posture will thrive. If it's inefficient, it will survive. If it's ineffective, it will kind of die slowly. And that's where if you don't keep up with your incident response plans, your patch management, your firewalls, and all that kind of stuff. But if it's ineffective and inefficient, your cyber defenses will die pretty quickly in the event of a cyber attack. So we will move on to the next slide. You can see the kind of cost integration of security and operations. Security isn't an exclusive thing within the business. It's a part of the whole business. So, using tools that can deal with all your infrastructure, all your devices, your mobiles, your laptops, your desktops, your servers, and all your kind of Internet of Things technology in there as well. How do we make it more effective? And that's basically making sure that you repeat and automate the repetitive tasks. Security teams are not the biggest teams in the world. They don't have time to look for every logs that come through a SOC or a SIEM, and making sure that where possible you can automate the reporting as much as possible. Then you get a bigger size and scale of the issue that you're trying to solve. In terms of continuous skill development and training, you have lots of end user stuff. I'm pretty sure everyone's done a security assessment online. They've had a test phishing email and they kind of clicked on the wrong thing. But it's about, it needs to go further than that. You need to say, well, what about when people go into cafes, go into public places, when they're traveling? Understand, the kind of malware and ransomware and how it gets into the system. But it's just good cyber hygiene to make sure that that's all kind of in place as well. So in operational resilience, basically shows kind of board efficiency. If you've got a good level of maturity in place, the cost of the difficult stuff goes down, your level of resilience goes up. So that something does go bang in terms of a cyber incident, you can basically jump on it, and you have a clear set of systems, processes, and procedures in order to react. And on the last topic, before I hand over to Katerina, is making sure the kind of incident response side. So one of the key things, you can just go to the next slide, please. Brilliant. So the key thing is making sure you have the right incident response plan in place. A lot of times when I've seen this happen is someone says there's an incident, everyone gets on a bridge, and people are like, well, what do we do? Do we call our cyber insurance partner? Do we call our SOC partner? Do we call our service desk? So in order to really understand that, if we click on the next bit there, it's just to have the identification of assets and protection of systems. Really key thing, if there's anything to take away from today in terms of the incident response side, is know where all your assets are. If you've got a laptop that's been ransomware and is leaking data to the world, and you don't know what that asset is doing, then you're on the back foot straight away. So when you kind of talk about the recovery of assets, that's a key part of the incident response process. And if you've got a laptop that's leaking, you can shut it down straight away, restore it from the backups. One of the key things here is reducing the cost of an incident. It's making sure that you have those hot backups ready to restore straight away. We move on to the next slide. So one of the things is certainly been really fascinating to see in the cybersecurity industry over the last couple of years is the whole kind of cyber insurance side. One of the things we've certainly seen is the cost of premiums go up by about 50%, and then the level of cover go down by 50%. But basically, you shouldn't rely on cyber insurance when there's a cyber incident. They're there to kind of help you when things go wrong. They certainly often have a large amount of resource to help you, but make sure you read that cyber insurance policy. It deals with business interruption, it deals with data loss, and you have a good kind of package in terms of making sure that should it all go wrong, you've got all the resources in the world to count on. And kind of bringing the board relief. It's all very well kind of having the latest risk assessment, the latest policies and all that kind of thing, making sure that there's a deep, in-depth plan for the resilience of the organization. A lot of cyber incident response feeds into the business continuity planning. But the key thing with any cyber incident is making sure that you can restore those systems and get the business up and running as soon as possible. And then the last slide from me, breach readiness is all about the preparation, the ability to translate kind of impacts into solutions. So it's all about preparing for the worst, but also kind of hoping for the best and making sure you run those fire drills so that if the bad stuff does happen, you're ready to jump into it. So on that note, thank you all very much for your time, and I'll hand over to Katerina to carry on with the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick, and I'd like to welcome everybody from my side as well to the webinar, and I'll be giving my perspective on what Nick talked about from the client side and what I've seen during audits that I've carried out of information security management systems. Next slide, please. So as a lot of you might be aware, but for those who are not aware, ISO 27001 is the management system standard that gives you the requirements and helps you implement an information security management system. It gives you a great framework to implement controls to protect your assets and information. It doesn't tell you how to implement the control, because as any other management system, the requirements are set in a way that makes it flexible and easy for any organization to implement an information security management system. Nick talked a lot about how you can become more resilient, effective, and efficient, how you can protect your information, your systems, your assets, because resilience, effectiveness, and efficiency are three aspects that are very crucial and will help you build a robust but also sustainable security posture. ISO 27001 is all about managing risks within the entire organization. And something I'd like to stress upon, and what clients have also seen, is that information security is not only the responsibility of the cybersecurity team or the IT department. Everybody needs to contribute and support. It's everybody's responsibility, and that's why it's very important constantly to raise your employees' awareness and let them constantly know how important it is for them also to contribute in their way in protecting assets and information. So it's all about cooperation within a company and working together to make the whole environment within a company more secure. A lot of our clients that I visit for 27001 when I carry audits see a lot of benefits, maybe not from the beginning of the implementation of the management system. Usually results are more visible after the first certification cycle. So I'll try and give you some of the benefits that our clients have seen. Next slide, please. Nick focused a lot on how important it is to have an incident response program and plan in place. So that's where a lot of clients see benefits, because having this good framework in place has helped companies see a significant reduction in their security incidents, at least the serious ones, when they take measures and introduce extra controls. The serious ones, those are the ones that keep the CEO of each company or the managing director awake at night and worrying, because you'll still encounter small or medium criticality incidents, but at least you have the framework and the plan to address these when something comes into play. When you have this plan and you exercise it regularly, companies have seen that there's no loss of productivity as well, because they're able to resume operations quite quickly. And also having backup systems in place, they can ensure that in case there's an event or a disruption in operations, they're able to get data back in place to help people with operations and minimize any downtime they have when an incident happens. One of the biggest benefits, though, is that there's increased awareness, meaning that people know what to do in case something happens. People can be the weakest link but also the first line of defense against any incident that happens. So creating this security conscious culture within a company is very vital. You get a phishing email, you know how to report it. Something happens, you know who to go to. You lose your laptop or it's stolen, you know that you need to report it immediately. So there's no data breaches, which might also result in fees or penalties, especially when there's legal requirements in place for data protection, which, as Nick mentioned, we have the GDPR in EU and also a lot of regulations around the world. Another benefit that companies have seen as well is areas where they can focus on and introduce improvements. Analyzing and doing a trends analysis of incidents or events that have happened can give you the information on where you need to focus. Am I receiving a lot of phishing emails? Do I need to enforce stronger password policies, MFA, multi-factor authentication? Do I need to introduce this? Do I need more regular software updates? So always making use of the data that comes out of the implementation of a management system is very useful, because it gives you all the information you need to make data-driven decisions within the company. Next slide, please. So another area that Nick touched upon is supply chain risks and what you need to do. And that's also something companies have benefited from with the implementation of their information security management system, because they hold their vendors and any third party they work with responsible and have them implement the same standards, the high standards that they implement themselves. Because a lot of risk can come from your supply chain and your vendors as well. You have procedures in place that make you select the right vendor, and as Nick said, not just somebody that you met at a cybersecurity conference. It seemed nice to have as a vendor, so you have the right processes in place to select who's appropriate for you. And also vendor, these rules and controls are cascaded all throughout the supply chain, because your vendors might also be using third parties. So these are cascaded throughout the supply chain, minimizing any risk that can come out of your supply chain. Things are much easier to onboard and offboard employees. You make sure that people have access to the systems they need to have access. And during the whole employee lifecycle management, a lot of tasks, especially administrative ones, are streamlined as well. Having an information security management system helps a lot with audits as well. You have policies, you have procedures in place, you have plans that you regularly test, and it's very easy for you to prove to any external company, whether it's a regulator or a client carrying out an audit at you, or if it's a third-party certification body that has certified you, that you comply with the requirements, whether these are requirements coming out of 27001 or whether these are contractual requirements, or if there are requirements that come out of legislation. The introduction of automation and machine learning technologies have also provided to a lot of clients a significant return on investment. You have teams focusing on what's important instead of carrying out manual security tasks. So they focus mainly on how they can enhance information security and improve their security posture even more. Next slide, please. So it might be costly initially, but all the investments that are necessary in all these security tools, technologies, but also in your people as well, because as I mentioned before, people are very important in being the first line of defense when there's an incident within the company. That will certainly enhance your security posture as in an organization, and in the long run you will see cost minimizations. Your assets and any sensitive information is better protected by implementing controls, having threat intelligence in place, testing your plans, being able to address incidents much more effectively. And also, it helps you provide confidence to your clients and any third party like regulators as well, that you're taking care of it, that information security is something that you're focusing on and is taken seriously. And also, if you're thinking of expanding your business into new markets, having an information security management system can also help you easily comply with local regulations, because you already have a process in place to detect what does apply to me, what is expected of me, and can also support with protecting your intellectual pillars. So it's quite important to focus on the three pillars that were mentioned before: resilience, effectiveness, and efficiency. Having this holistic approach, because neglecting any one of them could lead to vulnerabilities and increase the risk of potential breaches. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand over to Alex for the panel.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Katerina. So hopefully everyone enjoyed today's presentation. As a reminder, these subjects here today are to bring light the ideas that you can discuss with the board, with your CEO, with whoever you report to within information security, and allow for those costs to be seen as actually a way to modernize your workplace, to bring more efficiency into the way that you can actually provide your employees day-to-day business as usual activities. And additionally, when it comes to sales, right, when it comes to bringing on new clients, how can you be procurement ready? How can you show the board, hey, we are ready to have a risk assessment against us because we have all of our controls in place, we have all of our policies in place. So we're actually going to have a panel, some panel questions between Nick and Katerina. But outside of those panel questions, the line is open for Q&A. So if you have any questions, Nick and Katerina are going to be here to answer them. Additionally, we're going to be sending out a copy of today's webinar, or more so a recording, along with a copy of our slides, so that you can bring this back internally and discuss how you can take these topics and actually action them following today. I have my first question here, and this question is actually for Nick. Through these topics, it's really important for people to have these skills, right, to bring these topics to their board. What do you see as the most valuable skill, Nick, in communicating these cyber plans to the board?
Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. That's a really great question. So what I would say to that is, when you're speaking to the board, don't dive down into the technical detail. Whilst people like myself live, breathe, eat it, sleep it, kind of regurgitate it on a daily basis, I think one of the key things is understanding the business language of the board. It's far too easy to kind of stand up in front of the board and say, we've had 1,300 cyber attacks today and we've got malware IPs. You will lose that audience quicker. The business want to know how much it's going to cost them. They want to know what's the benefits of security. If it all goes wrong, how quickly can they back up running, get up and running, and first of all, how are you keeping the bad guys from getting out of the place in the first place? So it's the real challenge is, if you've got a career being a security analyst or a SOC person or a technical person, you kind of get to that day when you're the CISO, you have to change the language of the audience, and that's the really key thing, is take a step back, read the room, understand the audience.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Nick. Thank you for that. So the key there is to really understand who is in the room then, right? Really try to put yourself in their shoes and see what's going to allow them to say yes to what you're asking for, or what's going to allow them to understand what you're talking about. So Katerina, you talked a lot about the different areas of ISO 27001 and how that can bring board relief. Now, when it comes to risk management, the board, and when we say the board, this could be your C-level, right? Where do you see transformation with your clients when it comes to risk management from the start to the finish of ISO 27000?
I think the basic benefit that clients have seen from introducing this risk management framework is helping understand the board and their top management how important it is to address all potential threats, what the impact will be on the company. And as Nick said before, you need to be careful with the language you use, not technical terms to confuse them. But if you start talking in terms of money and how much it will cost if they don't address their threats, how much will it cost if I have a ransomware attack and I can't get into my network, and how much it will cost if I need to pay the attacker, that's when they start understanding how important it is to support all this effort within the company. So it's changed the perception of top management, because sometimes, like any management system, 27,001 is considered a burden, a cost, but in the long run, you can see a lot of cost savings.
Excellent. Thank you, Katerina. So to go from cost savings to how to show things, how to show areas that are costing you money. Nick, something that has come up over the past couple of years, especially with the pandemic and with IT looking for solutions to modernize the remote workforce that exists today, what we're seeing is technical debt. And what a lot of organizations are doing is talking about technical debt. But what do you see as a way to communicate technical debt and how to relieve your budget holders of that?
Yeah, so with things like technical debt, it's making sure that you don't fall behind on the pace of technologies. A lot of the time we see is a lot of IT infrastructure is built for the office environment. It's not built for the mobile or hybrid environment. I think vendors like Microsoft have gone a really long way recently in terms of kind of using their OS platforms and some of their things to kind of really build in security in there. But the thing with technical debt is making sure that you've got good flexible contracts with your suppliers. I've seen some real interesting stories where, you at the beginning you sign a really great IT agreement for 5 years and it's an unbelievably good price. And then a year down into the contract, you realise it's not working quite so well. By the third or fourth year, you're realising it's causing issues. By the fifth year, you can't wait to get rid of them. And that's because you really need to make sure that technical debt doesn't build up with your current supplier. Use the skills of your procurement department and don't kind of basically say we need everything at the beginning and set up in a certain way. Make sure that as your key supplier contracts evolve, you evolve with them and you allow for updates of technology and things along those lines. So many times it's like literally you want a simple change that's going to cost something out of a budget. It needs to be more flexible than that. The threats and the vulnerabilities are moving too fast for you and your suppliers to stay still.
Yeah, absolutely. Flexibility within your contracts can show your ability as a budget holder to navigate costs and eventually actually ask for more when you can opt out of areas that you had initially spent money in. One last question for Katerina, and then I have a question for both of you. So when it comes to ISO compliance 27001 across the board, right? We talk a lot about information security, information management systems, but we don't talk about what's beyond that. What do you see as something that is beyond ISO, right? That actually impacts organizations beyond a technical perspective?
I think that's a great question. And creating the awareness and the culture that both myself and Nick talked about previously, of constantly learning, being able to adapt to new evolving threats, and being more agile as a company comes from the continual improvement process that is a requirement in any management system. It's not only in 27001. And also having that risk management mindset makes you think, do I need to extend this framework to address more generic disruptions in operations and start thinking about business continuity as well? What happens if there's a natural disaster? If I lose my supply chain, which is something that a lot of companies experienced during COVID and after COVID, a lot of companies have challenges. So you start thinking not only about the availability, the confidentiality, integrity of information only, but think about more generic and more holistic risks overall to operations. So depending on how you implement any management system and how further you want to improve it, and if you want to take an extra step, it always helps making your company prepared for any event.
Yep, absolutely. And so that's the basis of today's discussion right there, right? So identifying where you can take compliance away from the idea of a cost and showing how you can actually benefit, right, in different areas of an organization. So my last question here, and then we'll get to Q&A. And as a reminder, the line is open, no bad questions. So as we continue to move forward throughout this cybersecurity journey we have throughout organizations, what do you see as the biggest hurdle for leaders in securing budget to enhance their operation? And I'll start off with Katarina with that question, and then Nick, you can provide some guidance as well.
Yeah, I'd say a few things. One is sometimes it's difficult to demonstrate return on investment because security initiatives are not revenue generating within a company. So it's difficult to convince your top management to invest, sometimes until something actually happens. That's one thing I would say. Budget allocations and priorities within an organization, who's going to get budget within the company and trying to get that. And one of the most important things is the lack of the top management understanding and the impacts of not having controls and measures and investing in security.
Great. And Nick, so what do you see as some hurdles?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people traditionally see cybersecurity as just an out-and-out cost. You know, you're the first and last line of defense. But you know, a lot of people say, well, we haven't been breached in the last 10 years, so what makes you think you're going to be breached now? And that's kind of doing your job in security, isn't it? It's kind of, if you haven't had a breach, what's the problem? I think the thing is very much kind of, you're there as a kind of protection, you're there as an assurance function. You know, your job is to make sure the bad stuff doesn't happen, and then you have insurance for when the bad stuff does happen. And I think really the case is it's just saying to them, you know, what is it that you think, especially in today's network connected world, would stop your business overnight? Would it be the inability to take payments? Would it be the inability to get your data? Would it be for your trading platform not to work and stuff along those lines? It's basically, security is a kind of bit of a what ifs type scenario, and the whole idea is that a good security control will basically stop the bad thing from ever happening. You know, if you think of a good security guard on the edge of a nightclub, they're not going to let any troublemakers in. But when it does happen, they're pretty quick to get them out. And that's essentially the same with cybersecurity. It's the same, you know, I think in many ways for a business board, you need to create that kind of tangible feel to it. You know, people see cyber as some kind of ones and zeros on a screen, and it doesn't really affect them in the real world. But I think we've seen so many cyber attacks. It's all about, you have to use careful analogies to basically kind of bring a tangible feel to what you're trying to protect.
Those are some great pointers, both Katarina and Nick, and thank you for answering some of the questions today. We do have two other questions from the audience, and these are going to be for Katarina. Actually, they're both regarding ISO 27001. So there's been an update within ISO 27001 and a lot of interest into what that actually, what those changes actually are. What do you see as an improvement or significant improvements within the ISO 27001 2022 framework that bring to these topics?
Sorry, I was muted. I'd say one is threat intelligence. Wasn't very clear in the previous version of the standard. So it makes companies introduce means and a way of learning about new threats and what they can do to protect themselves from all these evolving threats. And the other one is also about the use of cloud providers. Wasn't very clear. It's a new requirement in the updated version of 27001. So it makes you think, like you would do with any other vendor or third party you want to work with. How am I going to choose my cloud provider? Because there's a lot of discussions going on about security by using cloud. So how do I choose them? How do I work with them? If I choose to change my cloud provider, what do I need to make sure that there's no data residing there, especially sensitive or PII data that might lead to breaches and penalties as well. So I'd say those are the two basic changes and new elements that will help all companies.
Excellent, thank you. And then the next question is, how can ISO 27001 prepare organizations for other maturity models? And Nick and Katerina, I think that you both can maybe provide some input here.
What the requirements in 27001 are similar to requirements that are another in the NIST standards. It helps you also with privacy management, for example, 27701, which has to do with privacy management and how you protect PII data, personally identifiable information, is based on 27001. If you're a cloud provider and you process or you control either you're a controller or a processor, there are two other standards that are based on 27001. So it creates that framework that helps you develop on that and include any other further requirements that might come up from other systems or information security frameworks out there. Nick?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. You know, ISO 27001 is a framework as much as a management standard, and you know the clauses side of it are like do some risk management, do an audit, have continuous improvement, have management oversight. The Annex A controls are kind of like the basics in terms of like prescriptive control. But I think also when you look at things like NIST CSF and how it blends into the information security lifecycle of the identify, protect, react, recover, you know, all those kind of lovely things in there. But also, you know, if you think of things like the HIPAA security rule over in the United States and how high trust CSF is based on ISO 27001, that's kind of really important. I would say that ISO 27001 isn't necessarily a prescriptive kind of control framework. You have lots of things like CIS 18, you know, CSC top 20 COSO frameworks that can provide some pretty prescriptive control. But in terms of having a plan, do, check, act, in the sense that you have a control that reduces risk and you remediate and treat that risk in order to make a better outcome, I think is a really, really good starting point. Thank you.
And just to add something, because as Nick said, the controls are not very prescriptive. It's the same with any management system standard, and it just sets requirements, and on purpose they're not very prescriptive because ISO wants to give the flexibility to companies to interpret the requirements. So regarding any legal requirements that might apply to a company, it says you need to have a process to identify, include them in your management system, and confirm every now and then that you comply with these requirements. So it sets the framework, and then it's up to you to decide what's applicable and what extra you need to introduce as a control.
Yeah, and I mean, in tandem with that, right? So what's the ROI that you see with clients? And this is another question from the audience. So what's the ROI that you see to quantify in monetary terms the potential loss in case of a breach occurs, and use it to justify the investment in ISO 27001? So in short, what do you see as the way to communicate the or communicate and quantify the potential loss in case of a breach, and then using that monetary value, right, that you may lose within a breach to justify the investment in 27001? Nick or Katerina, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the average cost of a ransomware attack, and this is based on just pure internet searches, but is around about $4.5 million. Which is a pretty large amount. Obviously, there've been some big ones at the top and lots of little ones at the bottom. But in the sense, that is why cyber insurance is almost becoming can become unaffordable unless you put the right controls in place, because the risk is too great. By putting ISO 27001 or other compliance standards in there, it basically reduces the risk of a ransomware attack, and it makes you more likely that the insurance companies will cover you. I suppose in a way it's a bit like building your own car and not putting a decent set of brakes or airbags or roll cages or whatever you want to put on there, because you won't get insurance for it. And do you want to run your business in that high risk environment without those safeguards in place, so that if it does go wrong, you've got that support from peers? So what I would say is that the return of investment is quite literally you will keep your business running, and I think that's the key message.
I think that's very valuable, right? Putting in ISO 27001 can reduce the cost of cyber insurance. And whoever had asked this question, there's many other ways, right? And we'll be happy to answer them offline if you'd like to talk to Nick and Katerina about that. I just want to make sure we get to one last question here. So as standards are moving to the way of more aggressive detection capabilities, is ISO 27001 moving slower to that way compared to other standards?
No, I wouldn't say it's moving slower. All the management system standards, including 27001, have a specific structure. It was improved some years ago to include a proactive approach. It talks about risks, which means being proactive, but also opportunities as well. So in each management system standard, there's a sector that talks about how you address risks and opportunities. So that means having a proactive approach and not a reactive one. And even before standards started following this new structure that was set by ISO, which is based on Annex SL, as ISO talks about it. One thing I always told clients, it's about how you interpret the requirements and if you can see behind them and think a step further. So I think it always had to do with about being proactive and not reactive, waiting for something to happen so you address it. And it always had corrective actions. Corrective actions is, the correction is something I do when something happens. The corrective action is, what am I going to do to prevent that from happening again. So that is having a proactive approach, and that's always been a requirement in 27001.
Great. Thank you, Katerina. So with that, there are no more questions in the Q&A. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. To watch Katerina and Nick go through the main fundamentals of why cybersecurity is more than a cost. So thank you both, Nick and Katerina, for taking time today to speak with me. If you do have any questions following today's presentation, you can go to the email address posted on the slide here, or feel free to reach out to any of us directly, and we'll be happy to make sure that your question is answered and answered thoroughly. Really appreciate your time today, and we hope to see you on the next LRQA webinar series.